Hi, I'm Claire Metz, and this is my Patronage Project. Over these slides, I'm going to be looking at 6 different artworks and discussing the relationship between the works and the patrons. I'll also be briefly discussing the painters themselves and the ways in which the art was influenced by the patronage. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to listen, and I hope you enjoy. To start off, I'd like to take a look at this famous work by an equally famous artist, Michelangelo. The piece here is called Pietà, meaning pity. And as we can see, the statue is depicting the Virgin Mary mourning and supporting her dead son Jesus. The work was commissioned by a French cardinal with the intention of it being installed as a tomb monument in the old St. Peter's Basilica. While the cardinal is not referenced directly within the work, I feel that his religious authority, with him being a cardinal, paired with the biblical subject matter of the work itself, and the intended location of where the work was supposed to go, is a connection that should not be overlooked. And while this form of patronage may be less direct than other works of art, Pietà stands out to me because of its longevity and significance with Michelangelo himself. The work is the only piece he ever signed, and it's even rumored that he may have slipped into the church late at night to sign the strap on Mary's chest, so there would be no confusion as to who exactly created this masterpiece. To continue with the work of Michelangelo, this next piece we're going to take a look at is known as David, or more specifically, Michelangelo's David. The patron of this work is interesting because it's an institution rather than an individual. The statue was commissioned by a Florentine cathedral, and it was intended to be placed high on a buttress of the cathedral, buttress being a structure that's built against a projecting wall that kind of acts as a support system. Now, similarly to the previous work, Pietà, the patron, or patrons I should say, are not directly referenced within the work, but the same logic still applies. The religious authority of the cathedral, paired with the biblical subject matter of the story of David, and its intended location, being also the cathedral, clearly displays the kind of connection and desire that these patrons would have for wanting to create a work such as this one, and how it makes sense with the context surrounding them and the kind of lives they had and the kind of institutions they ran. Now, although this work was supposed to be placed by the cathedral, it ended up being so well received upon its completion that the city council opted to place it in the principal city square. This made David more of a political symbol at the time, although the story of David and Goliath is no doubt religious, and I wanted to read a quote from the textbook that I feel summarizes these two together. "This is not a triumphant hero with the trophy head of the giant Goliath already under his feet, slingshot over his shoulder and a rock in his right hand. Michelangelo's David knits his brows and stares into space, seemingly preparing himself psychologically for the danger ahead, a mere youth confronting a gigantic, experienced warrior. This David stands for the supremacy of right over might." Moving away from the works of Michelangelo, I'd like to examine a different artist, or rather a trio of artists known as the Limburg Brothers. The piece I have displayed is part of a larger series of pages in what's known as a Book of Hours. This Book of Hours is called a name I can't pronounce but have included in the slides.
Les très riches heures du duc de Berry.
was commissioned by Duke Jean of Berry. Now, this Book of Hours didn't only hold prayers and devotionals, but it also contained a calendar of holy days. This leads me to the specific page that I want to discuss, which is the January page. Now, this page is really interesting because we get the opportunity to actually see the Duke, or the patron, depicted within the page. He's portrayed with this deep blue clothing with gold accents, which would be an indicator of someone that's very wealthy or has the money to have clothes like this. When we move up a little bit, we can see a remnant of a halo, if you want to call it that. It's not a halo, but it highlights the figurehead, which is the Duke, and highlights his actual head, making our eye more drawn to him. That's even furthered when we have that paired with the fur hat he's wearing on top, which would be another indicator of his status. Overall, I personally feel that the Duke was motivated to commission this work as a show of his wealth and status. Now, the Book of Hours shouldn't be boiled down to just a flashy display of wealth. I mean, it definitely holds artistic and spiritual value, but at the end of the day, they're not cheap. And even more so when we look at the Duke's depiction within the book, and he's not really portrayed as a devout religious man. He's portrayed as what he was, wealthy and surrounded by finery and power. This work I'm discussing is titled The Battle of San Romano, and it was painted by artist Paolo Uccello, and it was commissioned by Leonardo Bartolini Salimbini. Leonardo was a very influential figure. He actually led the Florentine Governing Council of Ten during the war against Lucca and Siena. This experience in battle and commissioning of a work portraying battle can lead us to infer that Leonardo's desire to have this piece commissioned came from his inner sense of civic pride and this sort of desire to commemorate his military achievements. While this can be one way of inferring the reasonings behind Leonardo's commissioning, however, I personally feel that the reasoning behind the commissioning was layered. On one hand, he was commemorating his military achievements, and on the other hand, there are several indicators throughout the painting that have more symbolic meanings. Hedges of oranges, roses, and pomegranates placed within the artwork are all fertility symbols, and this in tandem may suggest that Leonardo would have commissioned the painting for his wife, especially as it was commissioned around the time of his wedding. I particularly enjoy Leonardo's style of commissioning, if you will, because it's multifaceted. I like that he has the layer that is presented outwards. He has the military leader in these achievements that is what you take at face value, and not only what you take at face value, but what people would see him as at face value. However, I like that within this, we can find deeper, more intimate meanings that give us more of a sense of how he was as a person, or the kinds of things that he would have valued. I think it really shows the kind of importance that both aspects of himself may have held. This military leader and a husband. The work I'm going to discuss is one that I'm sure most people are familiar with, and it's the Sistine Chapel, more specifically, the painted ceiling done by Michelangelo. And while I've discussed Michelangelo a good bit today, I want to talk about Pope Julius II, who commissioned this work. I find Pope Julius quite interesting because he was quite adamant about having Michelangelo paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling, no matter how much Michelangelo may have opposed to this. His patronage is unique because of his lack of demands or control. While yes, he requested things to Michelangelo, and Michelangelo wasn't willing, he ends up letting him paint whatever he wants. And while I'm sure there's more approval to this behind the scenes, I just find it fascinating that he commissioned this infamous work that we know today and was okay with having no say in it. I feel that this really reflects his career, one could say, as a pope, because while he's demanding it first, after battling somewhat with Michelangelo, he then gives up reins and it becomes dedicated to God. It's telling the creation story. We see Adam, we see Eve, we see endless religious figures, saints, and just things of that nature. Overall, I just really find Pope Julius interesting because of his eye for art. And that's where I go back to this point of, I don't feel that it mattered to him that he was depicted or that he had the creative control, because when we look back, he commissioned some of the most influential works of the Renaissance that we still talk about and dissect today. I feel that he had an eye for great art even where others couldn't see it, even if Michelangelo himself was quoted as saying, "I'm not a painter." The final work I'm going to be examining, or room I should say, is the Camera Picta, meaning painted room. And it was painted by Andrea Mantegna and commissioned by Ludovico Gonzaga. Now, the Gonzaga family would actually be the family in which Andrea would continue to work with for the rest of his life. And in some aspects, I think that this closeness or repeated working with can be reflected in the work, specifically in the frescoes of this room, because there are numerous Gonzaga family members depicted. And not only does it depict them, but it depicts them together with friends and children and animals and enjoying themselves. And I feel that this reflects the kind of time Andrea would have spent being around the family and observing them. And honestly, how beautiful is it to not only have the family doing all these activities together, but then also going out of their way to have a work commissioned that commemorates the togetherness of their family in a way that the friends that are also depicted within the work will come and see, this is what the Gonzaga family is like. We spend time together, we do things, and we have a beautiful room. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to my project, and I hope that I was able to provide you with a valuable insight or two, or at the very least told you something that you may have found interesting. Thank you so much.